Hi, everybody. This is Mike here from The Flywheel. On The Flywheel, we talk to experts about career, personal development, and even business expertise. Today on the channel, we've got Vinay, and we're going to be talking about big career changes and things like moving from a big company to a scale up. Vinay is going to tell us a little bit about his entire career journey, some of these decision points he's come across in his life, and some advice that he can impart onto others that are maybe going through something similar or considering something similar. So, welcome to the show, Vinay. Maybe you want to start with a quick introduction about yourself.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Mike. So my name is Vinay Nair. Uh, I'm actually just recently finished a gig as a CMO at Kira Systems, which is a legal AI tech company, and they create a really awesome technology that reviews contracts and documents and is able to help lawyers do their jobs faster.
Tell us a little bit about, where your career journey started. I know it was probably like 3 or 4 years ago, but maybe you want to start at sort of the beginning and we can dive a little bit into some of like those big changes that you've made and sort of what helped you in that decision making process.
Yeah, sure. I mean, like I think my career was consisted of a lot of different shifts. A lot of pivots and shifts that were not necessarily linear in nature, and not necessarily always on a solid plan. I had different iterations of plans and different journeys and destinations, and ripped them up and rewrote them and made my way through. But this year basically marks my 20th year.
Wow,
Of sales and marketing
congratulations.
technology. Yeah, yeah, and thank you. And so I reflect back on it and go, okay, well, what was my first? How did I get into tech and tech marketing? It was kind of a bit of accident. I was actually trained and studied criminology and criminal intelligence analysis, and
Wow.
I had just finished a course at the University of Pittsburgh, where it was an advanced criminal intelligence analysis program. And I was hoping to go and work for the Mounties as a criminal intelligence analyst. That was my first plan. But things didn't work out the way that I had planned. I got selected, I got hired, but there was a huge hiring freeze at the time. And they asked me to wait for 2 years, while they were trying to figure out that hiring freeze. And so I was kind of stuck. I had this, master's in my hand, and I couldn't get any work anywhere because I was a Canadian in the United States, so they wouldn't hire me. And so I kind of hit a little bit of this brick wall, and I was waiting. And while I was waiting, my roommate at the time was an entrepreneur at heart, and he started a company in our house. And so every morning I'd wake up and come down to breakfast, and there was this team of developers coding on my dining table, and that's kind of how I got started in tech. But I think as I progressed, doing those odd jobs, where I kind of found myself really, really strong, and excited and passionate about, was the work that required a lot of analytical work. And then I found myself at IDC, which is like a market research firm,
Yep.
and they do all the tech forecasting and the market forecasting. And so I got really schooled there in market analysis, and that's where I found my own. And I realized that my core persona is, and my superpower is analysis. And so it was an amazing experience as a young analyst, because I got to go to all these countries, almost 20 countries in 3 years, to basically size them and understand the competitive market shares and the growth of these markets, and make recommendations to my clients as to whether they should enter those markets or not.
That's pretty cool. So you took basically your passion, which was going to be for like analysis and understanding in criminology, and you applied it to this scrappy, not in a garage startup that was actually in your kitchen. And then you took that and you started to parlay that into, well, I still like to understand and analyze things. And so you took that and blended it with a passion in terms of market. And so you started analyzing markets and took it down that way. So deeply connected, but very interesting how people can think about making a pivot based on a piece of something they like, but transforming that across industries and still being very successful.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I loved it. I think the startup experience was very helpful, because when you're building your first business plan, you have to go do a bunch of that work, right? That market analysis and sizing work. And
Yeah.
I was able to show that I had done that. And they brought me on as a pretty junior analyst, and then I just kind of worked my way up there. But the clients just got bigger, so they were able to do bigger projects, right? And so I got to do a lot more, extensive projects. And companies like Microsoft are huge consumers of market intelligence, right? So
Definitely.
they were my biggest client. Someone with my analytical mindset, I felt like culture would fit really well there, because I really got along with all my clients when I was serving them as a consultant. And so yeah, they came knocking on my door through a recruit cycle. And they said, hey, you know what? There's this competitive intelligence lead role for the Canadian subsidiary. Are you interested in that? And my resume just screamed competitive intelligence analyst. So it didn't surprise me that the recruiters found me. And so I went through a whole interview cycle. It was like, almost 20 interviews over like 3-4 weeks. It was
Wow.
crazy. And I thought I was going to get this job. And then they finally said no. She reached back out to me after I got the rejection notice. And she's like, hey, you know what? We really like you. Actually did really, really well, but this role just requires a bit more internal understanding of how we operate. And your background is purely in competitive intelligence analysis. And I got to know later what she meant by that, and what the role was. But she says, hey, we'd like to find a place for you here at Microsoft. Are you interested in talking about some other roles?
So that's incredible, right? Like just to pause there for a moment, I think a lot of people go down these like interview loops and get really excited, but sometimes almost like pigeonhole themselves like mentally that they can only do that role, or they get tied to like a job title. And what's impressive about this story is, you sold you, and you sold
Yeah.
your capabilities. And even though it wasn't a fit specifically for the role that was in question, you were able to still get noticed by the company, and they approached you for something that still could leverage your amazing diverse set of skills for something else they had in mind. And so, it's not necessarily always about getting discouraged, but
Yeah.
maybe it's there. But either way, the practice of going through those interview loops really helps you figure out how to position yourself and your skills, and not always be so focused on like a role title.
That was a great lesson for me as well. It's the first time any company had done that for me, where they weren't looking at me for just the role that I was applying for. Throughout the whole interview process, the different stakeholders were saying, "Well, if this doesn't work out, then come talk to us about another role." So that was just kind of the part of the culture at Microsoft, which I really liked. And so they asked me to interview for another role, which I went through a whole round of interviews for, and I also didn't get that one. But then they called back again, and there's one particular gentleman who was a hiring manager for the second role I didn't get, and he said, "Well, we have this other one." It was a huge pivot. It was a stretch for me, but they took a bet on me and they brought me in, and that started my product marketing journey. Right. So
Interesting.
that was great. I mean, when I got into Microsoft, I kind of felt like, I was at my home. I just felt like I was around people who thought about things the way I thought about things, very analytical people, very, some of the best people I've ever worked with in my career. I just started off a Windows Server. I think it was a portfolio that nobody really wanted. It was the most boring of all the Microsoft products, and so, but it was 700,000, $700 million, product line, and so it was a very important book of business for the company. And so I spent my time getting really technical, using my analytical mind frame to really understand technical concepts and not be scared of it, even though that I wasn't an engineer. And that's kind of why most people didn't never wanted the role, is because the technicality of the role scared them. But really, if you just have that learner's mindset, you can learn any technical product. I got really fascinated by it. Like virtualization was a big, trend at the time, and I just studied the crap out of it. There's a leadership role that opened up in the Dynamics business, which was actually the area that I studied a lot when I was an analyst at IDC. So I actually knew the market very well. And they said, hey, we have a leadership role here to be a Dynamics BG lead role. It'll be a leadership role, and you will, you'll get to, build your management chops, I guess you'd say. And so I was very lucky. I was very fortunate. I had some good managers and good leaders that were looking out for me and developing me. So all I had to do is put my head down and just do great work. And so I look back at that time in my career, and I'm like, it's the best leadership I ever had, and it was probably the most transformative part of my career, because it took me from being an individual contributor analyst to a marketing leader, essentially. Um, so yeah, we did that for 2 years, and I think generally what happened was, there was only kind of four kind of leadership positions in the product side in the Canadian subsidiary. And so I either had to kind of go into kind of the more generalist marketing functions in a leader, but it wasn't as interesting to me. Or I had to go into sales or into partner development, and I really started to love marketing. The way I think and the discipline around it.
So at that moment, it was like pretty clear that whatever you were going to do next had to revolve around marketing. Like that became an additional layer of passion. So, it started out with analysis and understanding, which, not too far from there is great underlying principles of a good marketer. And so that was sort of a moment of clarity for you where you were doing a bit of product management, you were learning more technically, but you knew you wanted to continue in marketing. And so you're trying to figure out, how do you go stretch your legs even further in the space of marketing? And that was sort of where you were at in your career and sort of your horizon of what you were going to go figure out next.
Correct. Absolutely. And marketing in itself was becoming a hell of a lot more analytical. And so I was finding that I was really getting intellectually stimulated by marketing because of the analytical components that digital marketing brought to the table. And so I find there was a shift happening as well that kind of made me more passionate about marketing. Because if it was just purely comms related, I probably wouldn't have stuck around because I'm more behind a spreadsheet than I am on the stage, in terms of my personality. And so I said, okay, marketing and leadership, that's where I want to go. And I seriously contemplated going to Seattle and Redmond. I love the company so much, but that's where I needed to go to grow. And then I had this really pivotal conversation with the boss at Microsoft that brought me into Microsoft, my first boss there, who had left Microsoft to go join a growth tech company as their chief product officer. And he told me on his way out, and we were just having some goodbye drinks with him, whatever. And I'm like, so why would you, he was the biggest Microsoft advocate you've ever met, and so why would you leave Microsoft? You were just set for great things. And then one of the things he said to me was, we can do it here. And I was like, what do you mean by that? And he's like, we can build great Canadian companies. Like, you don't have to go work for large US multinationals. You can learn from them, but then at some point we can build it here.
So at the end of the day, he really ignited this fire in you to consider something that at the time you hadn't really been considering. You'd been mulling over the fact of maybe there wasn't all of the roles that would potentially fit your marketing aspiration. And then there was this, I actually haven't considered that moment from someone that was super important to you in your career. So after that conversation, was it sort of like this seed that kept kind of burning in the back of your mind and growing and taking over more of like the, well, what if? And did you already know you needed to sort of move on, or was this part of a more planful career journey, kind of build out and moment of reflection for you?
It just kept going on in the back of my head, but it also like kind of a confluence of factors as well. It was like I got to a point where, I felt like I hit a ceiling in my marketing career. I think that if I were to go any more further in Canada, it would require a more operational leadership that was not necessarily my core skill set. So I knew I was hitting a dead end here. That seed was kind of in my head as well. But there's also a charismatic individual who reached out to me to talk to me about Intellex. And the guy was when I saw his name in my inbox, I had read about the guy for years. His name was Derek Smythe. And, he was probably, many people call him kind of like the godfather of Canadian tech. Like he was behind the 5 largest, Canadian, tech deals in Canadian history, And so he was in the Globe and Mail. He worked for Omer Ventures, former CEO of Brookfield. And so he was a kind of this, person that I had read about. And then his name showed up in my inbox to talk to me about a role at this company called Intellex, that's what he had just joined. And so he reached out to me, and and we had some good meetings. I remember at first he just kept trying to get a meeting with me, and I remember writing a note to him saying, "Hey, I'm not really looking to leave Microsoft." I remember sending a note to him, and then he wrote back to me and he says, "Well, I'm not asking you to leave Microsoft. I'm just asking you to do brunch." And so I sat down with him, and I was just expecting to meet an industry veteran. That's all in networking, potentially a mentor for me, blah, 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 right? Um, and that brunch was pretty transformational because the guy took me through his career, being behind Eloqua, behind Shopify, behind some big companies, and how he built his career in Canadian tech. And then that, the seed from the other, my other boss started going off. We can build it here, or we can build it here, and all that stuff started kind of culminating together. And he basically told me about how, you know, um, Canadian technology companies need good commercial leaders. There's a huge gap in the market. There's great technologists here, no shortage of technologists in Canada. It's the problem, we don't have the commercial executives that can think about how to scale go to markets. And that's why we end up selling out in Series A and Series B stages, because we don't know how to take anything beyond 100 million plus, and he was talking about that problem statement and how he had kind of committed his life, to go and try to build great Canadian companies.
Amazing. And so that's sort of where, it was not necessarily a quick and brash decision. It wasn't necessarily even forced. It was something that you over time had been thinking about some different aspects of your career that met with opportunity and timing of someone encouraging you to think about things maybe outside of the box that you had considered. Led you to move from a bigger company like Microsoft to follow that we can build it here motto, and go drive your impact, passion for marketing into the Canadian marketplace with some scale ups like Intellex. So then I know you were at Intellex for a bit. You were the CMO there. So how did that go? Did it check the boxes you were hoping to check to move from a big company to a scale up? What were some of the things that you loved the most, and what were some of like the biggest surprises to you?
Yeah, I mean, Intellects, I'll always be, thankful for that experience, because it was the first time as a leader leaving an established, context like Microsoft and moving into what I call the wild, wild west. It's you're on a bull and you're trying to stay on as long as you can. It's very turbulent, and it was learning for me, right? It was learning for me to kind of come out there and see how leaders operated in growth tech environments. There wasn't this like gravitational pull of talent the way that Microsoft had, where you would bring the best and brightest out of school, and so being a leader in a scenario where you didn't have the budget, you needed to go and spend a lot more time, hiring very young junior high potential talent, and grooming them and giving them all the frameworks that are needed to go do what the company needed to get done. So it was a huge shift for me from a leadership perspective. I got more exposed to more junior talent, and managing junior talent versus more senior talent. And so that was a huge shift for me. But also just, like marketing for a living, I call it, because in Microsoft, you have such an established brand, that for the most part, if you make a phone call, you'll get a meeting. But in some of these companies like Intellex and Kira Systems, like the mainstream don't know who you are. Your niche might know who you are, but the mainstream doesn't know who you are. And the problem statement that Intellex had for me was, how do we go upscale? How do we go in enterprise? We're really good at the inside sales model, in EHSQ, but how do we go and be that $1 million deal type company, that's going to go and drive amazing growth for Intellex? And so it was a shift that they were trying to make to a more enterprise market. But I learned a hell of a lot about digital marketing there, just like how the mechanics work and how this company basically built like a $50 million ARR business off the back of a PPC driven engine, and it was so mind blowing to me, how they converted an ad to revenue and the cycles it took and all the conversion rates, and learned a hell of a lot about like digital marketing at scale.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because you've touched on a thing where it's like Intellex, and then I know where I'm jumping ahead a little, but then you went to Kira Systems. They're very large, recognized Canadian brands, but to your point, maybe more so within specific communities or industries, and sort of the impact of brand awareness that some people maybe take for granted. can really help on some of that inbound or connection bridging. So it sounds like it really created this grit marketer in you. You took from like broad market understanding to figuring out how to do product marketing and operational excellence to building like true grit, all amazing career building motions. So maybe let's talk about Kira a bit.
And so Kira was a very different scenario where I met the founder through a networking, event. And he was just picking my brain because he just raised a bunch of funding and he was starting to think about how to scale his marketing operations. And so I was still at Intellex at the time when me and him met. And I was never thinking of going there because of the scale of size that they are and what I can, bring to the table. But his story was amazing. Like his story of how he, a former Wall Street lawyer, teamed up with a computer science professor to go solve a really, really big problem that he himself experienced as an associate, and created this machine learning technology that can review contracts and make revolutionize the practice of law. It was such a dramatic story,
Yeah.
and I'm a storytelling like nut. I get attracted to great stories, and so when the conversation started to turn to recruit, I already kind of had a flag in my head because I had never worked at an organization that small, and with that level of resources before. But I thought, okay, hey, you know what? Like maybe this is a new muscle I can flex. They wanted to go enterprise, they wanted to go mainstream anyway, so I can bring a lot of what I brought, to the table. But I can also learn how to build something, like how to build a MarTech strategy from scratch, how to go and build a brand from scratch, how to, all that kind of stuff. Even though Kira is well known in legal circles, elevating that to kind of a broader mainstream audience was kind of what they needed help with. So I thought, hey, that's a great challenge, and so it was kind of the intellectual connection to trying to, apply more mainstream concepts to a company that was really strong in the legal domain. And that's what I did. It was like 4 or 5 marketers when I joined, all generalists, kind of, a few years out of school, some of them, and in kind of like building a product marketing function, building, a brand and comms function, building a digital marketing discipline, building analytical and operations discipline. Like it was just like demand generation discipline, like all those things was not really established before. And it was a pure foundation build. Which was a huge learning for me, huge, right? Because I never like sat there and integrated MarTech systems before. Like all that stuff was just in place already, every time I showed up somewhere. And so I think what it did for me is it really kind of, gave me more range, so I can go and get a little bit more smaller in scale in terms of my contribution to add to my large enterprise, experience that I brought. And so it was great. It was a great experience, and we built everything from scratch. And we launched. I was showing you before, and we just recently launched our story in the form of a book. And it was a huge accomplishment. It took 2 years to write it out, but it's really just kind of documenting the story and telling it in a way that's emotive, so that customers really get attracted to the brand. That was actually one of the more ambitious projects I've ever done in my career. So we just launched that like yesterday. So
what's the name of the book in case people are interested to catch up on this amazing story? So AI for Lawyers. Where can they grab it?
Amazon, and when the bookstores open again, Indigo and all the major bookstores. It's published by Wiley. So
amazing. I'll make sure to link it in the comments section below as well in case anybody that's listening is curious to learn more about the story of Kira Systems. So now, Vinay, like, what are your top 3 learnings that people can take away from like this very inspiring career journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fundamental one, is that you have to kind of live, you have to kind of live your story. I think when you start to get into different environments, whether it be the startup environment or the major tech environments and so forth, they have these stories that they write for you, and they put you as the hero of that story, and then you kind of buy into the story and you live out the story. And one of the things I realized is I loved my time at all these companies I've worked at, but I needed to write my story, which necessarily didn't always jive with the stories of those places. And so I think it's really important that everyone takes the time to really understand what is it that you are, and what is it the story that you want to write for yourself, right? And so for me, that a big pivot was on the like I went abroad for 10 years, and I could have lived in the U.S. I could have lived overseas, but I made a conscious effort to come back to Canada because I actually believed in this place, and that's a big driver for me, like being in Canada and contributing to Canada and that kind of stuff. So for me, that was a very important thing. And so the sooner I realized that was my story, all these other concepts of living overseas in Singapore and Shanghai and or Redmond, like all that kind of stuff just kind of got put aside, and I can go focus on my story.
Number one, live and write your own story.
Number two, learning. I think the other thing is to really understand what's your superpower, right? And don't try to pick up other superpowers. Like just kind of really focus on your strengths. I think for me, I was always a very good analyst. Maybe not the best, boardroom, banter speaker, or probably not the best in the boardroom, probably not best in sales management 101, but I was always a very good analyst. And so really sticking to my core and playing the roles that I played as from my analytical core was what gave me a lot of differentiation.
So number two, you would say, is find your superpower and double down on it. Bet on yourself, double down on your superpower, and make sure that you focus on that, because it's really going to bring your story to life. So number three.
Number three is it kind of goes to the story one, but a bit more around knowing what your mission is, right? I think we spend way too much time at work not to derive a deep meaning for what you do. And so I find that like if you're just there for the paycheck, you're not going to do your best work, right? And so you have to find something bigger. What are you doing? Like, why are you trying to go and work your ass off and make money for your employer? There's got to be something to it, right? And so for me, I really anchored on the building great Canadian companies, and that really gave me a North Star for everything else, my story and my superpowers and everything like that. So you'll continue to see me kind of continue to go and evolve that mission. But I truly believe that probably should be number one.
So number three, you would say, is figure out your personal mission and how your career journey and life journey can sort of align to that, because that's where you're going to derive your energy really from. Others that are maybe considering a change in their career, in their life, what are some like parting words that you think our audience should hear?
Yeah, and it's no different from kind of some of the learnings as well. But I think really it's the grass always seems a little bit greener, right? And so every experience, even the ones that you're in, is probably green to somebody else. And so I always think about when you make your moves, to really try to truly appreciate the goodness and what you're in before you make the move to what you're going to. Because I'll guarantee you, when you go to the other thing, it's not going to be as green as you think it is, right? And I think that's definitely something I encourage a lot of people I mentor just to think about. Yeah, and I think in general, I feel like just collect a set of experiences. I think people get really caught up on linear growth, growing up in position and title. And my whole thing, and if my career is any kind of indication of it, it's like, just go and collect really, really rich experiences. And it could be lateral, it could be, even demotion sometimes from a seniority perspective. But if it increases your range, it just makes you a better leader later.
So Vinay, thank you so much for coming on to the show today. This story has been amazing. I've learned a ton. I'm sure the people listening and watching will as well. So thank you again. And once again, if you found this interesting, The Flywheel, where we talk to business experts about career advice, personal development, and tips on business, make sure to hit subscribe below, and we'll be bringing you content on a weekly basis. Thanks again.